Hi everybody, welcome to Aimee Nolte Music. One of the gigs that I always make sure I keep is accompanying choirs. I've accompanied choirs for several years now. Elementary school, middle school, high school, church, whatever. The reason I like to keep this gig is to keep my sight reading sharp. You never know, especially as a piano player, when you're going to need your sight reading skills. And it's a great way. Usually with these choirs, what I do is come in for one rehearsal and read down the charts and then show up for the concert. Sometimes it's just me, it's just the choir and me. And in that case, sometimes I have to fill several roles. I have to kind of punch the songs a little harder. I have to be the bass player, the guitar player, the organ player, depending on what the song calls for. Sometimes I have to add to the music. Because let's face it, these choir arrangers, although they're pretty good for the voices, they're not so good for the accompaniment. Oftentimes, if they're jazz tunes, these guys have no idea how to write jazz piano parts. I mean, they do their best, and some of them do better than others, but sometimes you have to, help them out a little bit. Other times, I lead a trio. They bring in a bass player and a drummer, maybe a guitar player, also for the rehearsal and for the concert. And in that case, you pretty much have to ignore a ton of what's on the page, assuming that you are an adept enough jazz player. So what I'm going to do today is actually take some choir music and show you the kinds of things that I think about as I'm reading down these charts. Also, a couple choir directors that I play for were cool enough to let me get some footage of the rehearsals for their holiday concerts. So at the end, I'll kind of show you what we came up with and how it sounds as a finished product. Shout out to Eric Hagstrom, Jordan Richards, who played with me on one of the gigs. Okay, the first thing to notice is what kind of a chart it is. Oh no, the first thing to notice is this. Can you see? Can you see the bottom of my page? You probably can't. How it's crumply? The first thing I do when I get any choir music is this. It's the first thing I do. I go through every single page and I just 3 little grabs on each corner. Now, some people like to do like sleeve protectors or whatever, and for somebody who's more responsible than me, that's probably a great idea. But I typically get to the rehearsal, do my crumple, do the gig. Anyway, it makes it really easy to grab the pages, because for me as an accompanist, that's just about my worst nightmare, is that I'm going to grab 2 pages or not be able to grab it fast enough as I'm turning pages. Okay, so the next thing to notice is, what style the song is in. And this is a very kind of traditional style. So this kind of thing where it's very traditional and, choir feeling, you don't want to mess with the accompaniment at all. There are important cues here that the choir will need, so I try to play everything just absolutely as written. Now when it comes time to page turn, the thing to notice is which hand is more important, because sometimes I'll turn with my right hand and sometimes I'll turn with my left hand. So let's listen to how this goes. It kind of goes da 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 dee, da ba da 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 dee. And the left hand is da 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 dee 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 da da. In this tenor part, da da. I kind of feel like the alto is the most. I mean, not that my thumb, I guess, is a better way to say it. Not that this is an alto part, but this inner voice is kind of the most important of this page turn. So that means I'll turn the page with my left hand so that I can keep that sounding. Sometimes I'll make a little note about what's coming up on the next page. Like, I didn't do it here, but that's just an E major chord. So I could have just written right here, E major. Sometimes I do that, and it helps, so that you don't miss a beat, and you can just keep going as you turn pages. All right, so that's the first thing. Oh, also because I'm a jazz player, once in a while I'll make myself a little note about what the chord is called. I don't know why I do that, but sometimes I do. It's just like a tiny analysis, helps me notice where the chords are moving to. Sometimes I just like to see them. Here's another example of a traditional kind of choir song. I love this one, actually. It's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, the Robert Frost poem, and it's been set so beautifully to music, and And I mean, this is gorgeous, and you would never want to change it. Sometimes in these arrangements, you'll see mistakes. Like here for instance, you can see that it's clearly a C sharp diminished chord. They had actually re-flatted the E flat right here, which sounds awful. So I kept it as a natural. I don't know why they did it. I think it was a mistake. I think it sounds bad that way. This is one that I'll talk about a little bit in depth. It says big band swing. So, you know, they tell you your tempo, they tell you that your eighth notes actually are swung. And there are little cues here and there, like drum pickup, that shows you that you actually should have a trio on this. But, you know, for the rehearsal, when I was there without the band, I had to be the band. So the first thing I did was, you know, I played it just how it's written. First time, you pretty much always do. Now, right off the bat, I had a problem with it because I know this figure. Ba, 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 boo, ah, ba, da, da, ba, ba. Those are pretty standard jazz rhythms. And I had a problem because they've written me a walking bass line. And I don't think it sounds very good with a walking bass line. So I remember seeing this and thinking that right off the bat, that to have it be just to have the busyness of that bass line, it's not a bad walking bass line. These notes are fine, but listen to how much nicer it sounds if I leave all of them out and just play root notes on 1 and 3. So in a 2 feel. Just like that. All of a sudden it's relaxed and more swinging. So sometimes, and this takes, you know, it takes practice, but sometimes you have to watch that because a lot of times choir arrangers, they don't know how to play jazz piano. And what they do know is that jazz usually has a walking bass line. So, I mean, if you look at this tune, almost through the whole thing, there's a walking bass line. Now there's hits sometimes. We'll talk about those in a second, but almost through the whole thing is a walking bass line. And you can see that I've gone through and made some changes. I've just written 2 feel, 4 feel, because as I got to know the song, I could tell that once the chorus happened, it would feel really nice to go into a 4 feel. Now the 4 feel means that you actually do play the bass line like that, and it changes everything, and it's a really nice change to be able to have. And when you play a 2 feel, if you want to, the way to do it is to just notice the bars that have 2 chords in them, and then all you have to do is just play D, B, E, A. You just play a half note, playing the root of every chord. And you can do like a little doom, doo, doom, doo, doom, doo, doom, just like a little extra, like a skip beat in between sometimes, and that feels great. It's a cool song. Let's play it just a little bit. Oh, sometimes there are hits. You always play the hits. There's no messing around when there's hits. Everybody plays them together, you, the bass player, the drummer. So coming into it. I'd also like to talk about this chart a little bit. A chart like this. This is also a swinging kind of chart. And it's very rubato at the beginning. And then you've got this line that shows that probably a good place for the band to come in would be here, so you can see my notes. It's like, Dasher and Dancer, and like that. The most famous reindeer of all. And then you see this. Like that. And so I put the band comes in here, and the drums will have brushes, and I don't even play yet. It's just like this. But what I noticed is that the bass part copies the baritones exactly. Rudy, the red-nosed reindeer. And if you ever hear that, you want to kind of go ahead and look to see if that continues, because it does. Rudy, the red-nosed reindeer. It happens, and it would sound bad if you played contradicting bass notes. And you can see that just keeps happening through almost the whole song. The piano is doubling what the men sing. So if you were to, or the bass player, so if you were the bass player or the piano player and you decided to play your own walking bass line and not the notes that are written, you might really mess those boys up. So you want to think about that. I also noticed that there's some really particular kind of hits for the piano. We've got these, and then, so if there are ever really particular hits, you always want to see if it matches the part, and it does. The altos are going, ooh, we're talking reindeer, and they've got me playing it. So they're going to be used to having that crutch as well. So you just got to be aware of when what they sing lines up with what you do. And then on the concert, even if you've got a trio, you don't want to abandon those singers. You still want to give them their cues. So it takes a little more thought than just coming in and sight reading. It's what makes a great accompanist, I think, is that you're actually really thoughtful about what you're playing. There's a cool part in this tune where one of the baritones steps forward and goes, like a light bulb, in his falsetto. I wrote a little note for the band to just lean back while he does that, because that's really cute, Anyway, again, just being thoughtful. The last thing I want to go over is this gospel tune that they had. It's a cool tune. I'll show you how it goes. So the first time I played that, I was like, oh, this is a pretty fine, it's okay, the way they wrote it, but you gotta feel this to play it with some soul. So you gotta have some volume, first of all, to play gospel numbers like this. And just having some volume and some to what you're doing, like just a little, can really make all the difference in how it sounds. You got, in a gospel number, the piano player drives the choir. So I love that, for one. I realized quickly that it helps to keep a quarter note going, just a pulse, especially if there's no drummer. So I picked my spot and I started adding a quarter note. I think I did it at 17. So, the kids are, keep on following, keep on following, keep on following. Keep on following the star of Bethlehem. And then about here, it just helps a ton to add some quarter notes. Boom, 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 boom. And you can keep the notes that are written, but if you add quarter notes, it really adds some drive. And you can choose your spot to do that kind of a thing, but it helps, especially if you don't have a rhythm section. But then sometimes, you take it down a notch because you've got this solo. You've got to listen, little children, these things I say are true. Here, the part, I even think it's too many notes, so I leave some of them out sometimes, like, whatever. There's a whole section that happens, where'd it go? Yeah, it's right here. This whole section happens, it says a cappella the first time, through bar 86. So for these first nearly 8 bars, we let the choir sing themselves. And that sounds great in a gospel choir, right? So getting into it, we've got to think about that, and it's a key change. We've really got to hit this key change hard for them to be able to hold, their new key, especially a cappella. So you come into that. And even though I'm not supposed to give them their first chord, I do anyway, because I think it sounds a little bit weird to just and then just leave them hanging, like what the heck. So I give them that first chord, and then the kids were clapping, so I think it looks great for the accompanist just to start clapping too. And so I would clap all the way through this, and about right here before it's time for me to come in, you can give a nice gliss. So you can take both of your hands and use your the back of your fingernails and give it a boom boom, following like that. That gives them a here I come, here we all come. It's coming back right here, and the drummer can do a fill, bass player can do a slide, something, just a bam, here we come. Always you have to pay attention to dynamic marking. So here's a subito mezzo piano, and I just write a cue for the band. Shh. Sometimes you just need a little extra something to remind you, because you're really cooking up to this point, right? So that little shh and a little arrow just kind of reminds me, it reminds them that's what we're about to do. And then I saw these hits at the end. This is like a little tiny piano solo, and playing it how it was written didn't sound great to me. So I made myself a note to play it legato, because if you try to hold the notes in between, it sounds a lot nicer. Like here's a common G. I keep that G down through right there. I keep the G, and then the G actually lasts for 4 beats. So if I can just keep the G sounding, I don't know, I think it just helps it to sound smoother and more in the style. So I hope that gives you a good idea about the kinds of things to look for as an accompanist when you're hired to play for a choir. Don't just come in and read it down. Be thoughtful about what you're doing. Give the choir support. That's your main job, is to support those singers. Take a choir gig if you don't have one, or a big band gig. That's another way to sharpen your sight reading skills too. But it's important. It's important to be able to see a piece of music and read it down. Here are some examples from the day. First one is of the middle school with the trio. This is one of the coolest school districts ever to be a part of, the Bonita School District in Laverne, California, because the middle school has 5 choirs. They've got a 6th grade boys choir, a 6th grade girls choir, a show choir, a 7th grade choir that's audition only, and an 8th grade choir that's audition only for mixed voices. And then the high school also has 5 choirs as well. And these kids, if they stick with it, they're going to be a part of this chamber choir at Bonita High School. That's just to die for. Best high school choir I've ever heard, hands down. So you get to hear a little bit of them too. Thanks for watching Aimee Nolte Music. I'll see you next time.